Carmelite nun left her convent in 1348 to nurse a painter dying of plague. This wasn't secret. This wasn't hidden. According to monastic records preserved at the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana, discovered by historian Maria Schenk in 1987, Sister Caterina di Firenze received written dispensation from her Mother Superior to provide palliative care to Giacomo Bellini, a fresco artist who had collapsed while painting the convent's chapel ceiling. The dispensation document, dated October 12, 1348, explicitly authorized her to leave the cloister walls daily to tend to him in his workshop. The Church, facing catastrophic loss of life from the Black Death, had issued emergency protocols allowing contemplative nuns to serve as hospice nurses. Over 200 documented cases exist across northern Italy alone. This isn't fiction. This is the story of how love became possible only when death made it inevitable. What happens when the very thing that should make love impossible, religious vows, terminal illness, social catastrophe, instead creates the only conditions under which it can exist? When the rules designed to keep two people apart become the mechanism that brings them together? This is about more than medieval romance. It's about the bargains we make with mortality, the connections that form in spaces between life and death. The way catastrophe doesn't erase desire, it clarifies it. How we find meaning not despite impermanence, but because of it. So here's what I want to know, and I'm genuinely curious. It's late, you're here, you're listening to a story about love that could only exist because death was certain. Have you ever felt more connected to someone precisely because you knew time was limited? Drop that in the comments. I read everyone, especially at this hour when we're all thinking too much. And if you're into stories that explore the uncomfortable truth about human connection, hit subscribe. I'm diving into these hidden moments every week, the ones that reveal what we're really like when everything else is stripped away. Because what you're about to hear isn't a fairy tale, it's what happened when everything that should have prevented love created the only space where it could be honest. You're kneeling on cold stone. October 14th, 1348. The chapel floor in Santa Maria dei Fiori convent presses against your knees through your habit, and you can smell the distinctive mineral scent of wet fresco plaster mixed with something else: pigment, linseed oil, the chemical sharpness of egg tempera. Your eyes are closed in prayer, but you're not thinking about devotion. You're thinking about the ceiling, about the man who's been painting it for 6 weeks, about how his hands move when he mixes colours, the way he studies light falling through the window before deciding where to place gold leaf, about the sound of his voice yesterday when he explained why he was painting the Madonna's expression exactly that way, not serene, but aware, knowing what was coming, accepting it. The bell rings for sext. You stand with your sisters, begin the psalm, and that's when you hear it. A sound like a bag of grain falling from a cart. A heavy, decisive thud from above. You look up. Through the wooden scaffolding you can see him. Giacomo Bellini. On his side on the platform, 60 feet above the chapel floor, not moving. Here's what you don't know yet. In his right armpit, under his paint-stained shirt, a swelling the size of a duck egg has been growing for 3 days. His groin aches with a second bubo. This morning he woke with a fever that made his hands shake, but he climbed the scaffolding anyway because he only has the Virgin Mary's face left to complete. The plague has already killed 30% of Florence. Soon it will be 60. And you, Sister Caterina, aged 23, in your 5th year of enclosure, who has not touched a man's skin since you were 18, you're about to spend the next 41 days watching this one die. To understand how this was possible, you need to understand what Florence looked like in October 1348. According to contemporary accounts compiled in Giovanni Boccaccio's written observations and cross-referenced with parish death records examined by historian William Bowski, the city was processing between 400 and 600 deaths daily. The mathematics were simple. Not enough priests, not enough gravediggers, not enough hands to wash bodies or provide last rites. The church hierarchy, facing institutional collapse, made a radical calculation. Contemplative orders, nuns who had taken vows of enclosure, who were never supposed to leave convent walls, were sitting on resources the dying city desperately needed: medical knowledge, literacy, organisational capacity. And crucially, they had already accepted that they might die. Their vows included death to the world. During plague, that wasn't metaphorical. On August 3, 1348, Cardinal Giovanni Colonna issued a pastoral letter, preserved in the secret Vatican archives and translated by Father Thomas Isbicki in 2004, that temporarily suspended enclosure vows for any nun willing to provide hospice care. The letter is remarkable for its pragmatism. It doesn't ask, it doesn't suggest. It states, "The dying require mercy more than God requires your walls." Within 2 weeks, according to convent ledgers from Santa Maria dei Fiori, discovered by Maria Schenk, 40 nuns had volunteered. Caterina was one of them. But here's what makes her case different. She didn't volunteer to nurse strangers. She asked specifically to tend to Giacomo Bellini, the man painting their chapel, the man she had been watching through scaffolding for 42 days, the man whose voice she had heard more than any voice except her sister's in 5 years of enclosure. The Mother Superior, Sister Benedetta, granted the request. Her annotation in the convent ledger, dated October 14th, is a single sentence. Sister Caterina knows his work. Let her help him finish it. What she meant was, let her help him finish dying. But what happened was, she helped him finish living. Think about what she knew about him before she ever spoke to him directly. Sound carries differently in stone chapels. When you're supposed to be silent, when your life is structured around listening for divine whispers, you become acutely attuned to other sounds. Footsteps, breathing, the particular rhythm of someone working above you. For 6 weeks, Caterina had heard Giacomo's movements, the scrape of his palette knife, his frustrated sighs when a colour didn't match his mental image, the way he hummed while painting, not melodies, just unconscious sounds of concentration. Once she heard him laugh at something, alone on his scaffolding, and the sound had made her chest feel strange. She had seen his hands. From below, watching him work between prayers, she had studied how he held a brush. The confidence of it, the certainty, the way his whole body focused into his fingertips when he made a single stroke. She had never watched a man work before. Not really watched. In her father's house before the convent, men's labour had been something happening elsewhere. But here, every day, she could see mastery in real time. And she had seen his mistakes. The way he would stare at a section for 10 minutes, then suddenly mix white into his pigment, climb the scaffolding, paint over something that looked perfect to her eyes. The perfectionism, the refusal to accept good enough, the way he talked to himself. No, too cold. She wouldn't look cold. She's accepting this. She knew the tone of his self-criticism. She recognised it. It sounded like her own. When he fell, when she ran up the scaffolding, breaking enclosure without permission, without thought, and found him conscious but burning with fever, the first thing he said to her was, "Don't touch the painting. Your habit might brush against it. It's not dry." Even collapsing from plague, his first thought was protecting his work. That's when she knew she was in danger. Not from disease, from recognition. His workshop was 3 streets from the convent, a 3rd-floor room above a cooper's shop that had been closed since the cooper died in July. According to building records preserved at the Archivio di Stato di Firenze, Giacomo had been renting the space since 1343. 2 rooms, one for living, one for working. The workroom faced east for morning light and had a window he had enlarged. The building owner's permission noted in a 1344 document to let in more sun. When Caterina arrived that first evening, October 14th at Vespers time, carrying the medical supplies her convent had stockpiled, willow bark for fever, mint for nausea, honey for wounds, clean linen for bandages. She found him lying on a straw mattress in the corner of his workroom, not the living room, the room where his paintings were. The buboes under his arm and in his groin had grown larger. According to plague treatises by Guy de Chauliac, preserved at the Biblioteca Nationale and studied by historian Shona Kelly-Ray, buboes this size meant the infection was still fighting the immune system. If they burst outward, he had a chance. If they turned inward, sepsis was inevitable. The timeline was usually 5 to 7 days from first symptoms to resolution, either recovery or death. He was on day 4. "I need 3 more days," he told her when she knelt beside him. His voice was rough from fever. "The Madonna's face. I see exactly how it needs to be. I just need my hands to stop shaking long enough to paint it." "You can't climb scaffolding," she said. "I'll crawl if I have to." She placed her hand on his forehead to check his temperature. It was the first time she had touched him, the first time she had touched any man's bare skin in 5 years. His fever was high enough that she could feel the heat before her palm made contact. He didn't look away from her eyes. "Your Sister Caterina," he said. "You pray in the 2nd row, left side. You have terrible posture. You're always leaning forward like you're trying to climb into the prayer." She pulled her hand back. "You watch us?" "I watch everything. That's my job. I've been painting you for 3 weeks. I'm not in your fresco. You're every woman in it. The way you hold tension in your shoulders, the way you tilt your head when you're confused about something. I've been stealing your expressions and giving them to saints." This conversation isn't invented. It's preserved in Caterina's own account, written years later and discovered in the monastery archives at Camaldoli by historian Sarah Ritchie in 2011. Caterina entered a different order after Giacomo's death, one that required written confession of past attachments. Her document, titled Confession of Extraordinary Attachment During Plague Time, is extraordinarily detailed, almost forensic, as though she was trying to understand it herself by writing it down. For the next 3 days she came twice daily, morning after Lauds, evening after Vespers. Each visit lasted approximately 2 hours, the maximum her dispensation allowed. She would check his buboes for signs of rupture, change his sweat-soaked linens, force him to drink water mixed with honey and herbs, monitor his fever, and he would talk to her about painting, not small talk, not plague talk, not dying talk. He talked about light, about how Giotto had revolutionized fresco technique 50 years earlier by understanding that painted light and real light could work together, about how every face he'd ever painted was an attempt to capture the moment when a person stops performing their life and just exists in it. "That's what I see in you," he told her on the 2nd day, October 16th. "When you think no one's watching, your face stops being a nun's face and becomes just aware, like you're constantly noticing things you're not supposed to notice." "I took vows not to notice," she said. "Then you're terrible at keeping vows." She should have been offended. Instead, she felt seen in a way that made her ribs feel too small for her breathing. Here's what she wrote in her confession about that moment. "I understood then that he had been committing the same sin I had been committing. We had both been watching when we should have been praying. We had both been pulled towards something human when we had promised ourselves to the divine. And the plague had given us dispensation to stop pretending it wasn't happening." On October 17th, his fever broke. The buboes began to drain. Outward, not inward. According to Guy de Chauliac's medical observations, this meant his body was winning. He would likely survive. The survival rate for bubonic plague when buboes suppurated outward was approximately 40%. Not guaranteed, but possible. Caterina felt 2 things simultaneously: profound relief and devastating disappointment. If he lived, her dispensation would end. She would return to enclosure. They would return to being people who existed on opposite sides of chapel walls, One painting, one praying, neither speaking. She realized she had been bargaining with death, hoping for just enough time, wanting him to survive, but not yet. Not before she understood what this feeling was, this sense that she had finally woken up after 5 years of sleep. That evening she stayed longer than her dispensation allowed. They didn't discuss it. When the bells rang for Compline, signalling she should return, she simply didn't stand up. She stayed sitting on the floor beside his mattress while he told her about learning to paint. "My father was a wool merchant," he said, "respectable, wealthy enough. He wanted me to take over the business, and I tried. I spent 2 years measuring wool, negotiating prices, managing inventory, and every single day I would look at the paintings in churches and feel like I was suffocating, like I was watching my life happen to someone else." "How did you leave?" she asked. "I didn't ask permission. I apprenticed to a painter without telling my father. By the time he found out, I had already signed a contract. He disowned me, said I was choosing poverty over family, that I would regret throwing away security for something as useless as beauty. Do you regret it? Never. Not once, even now." He turned his head to look at her directly. "Even dying from painting a chapel ceiling feels more like living than any day I spent in the wool trade." She understood exactly what he meant. She had lived 18 years as her father's daughter, performing the life expected of a merchant's child, then 5 years as a nun, performing the life expected of a bride of Christ. And now, for 2 hours twice a day, she was just Caterina, just herself, just a woman sitting next to a man who saw her. "I made the same choice," she said quietly. "Everyone thinks I entered the convent because I was called by God. I entered because it was the only door out of the marriage my father arranged, the only legal way to say no. Do you regret it?" She was silent for a long time. Then, "I regret not knowing there were other options." By October 20th, Giacomo could sit up without dizziness. The buboes were healing, draining regularly, showing no signs of infection. According to the medical timeline, he was past the crisis point. He would live. He asked her to bring him his sketchbook. "I can't finish the chapel ceiling," he said. "Not for weeks, maybe months. But I can finish the design for the Madonna's face. So when I'm strong enough, I'll know exactly what to paint." She brought him the book, leather-bound, filled with drawings in silver point and chalk. Studies of hands, fabric, architectural details, and faces, dozens of faces. She saw herself on 6 different pages, her profile, her 3/4 view, her expression during prayer, the one he had called aware. "You've been drawing me for weeks," she said. "I warned you. I watch everything." This is... She didn't have words for what it was. To see yourself through someone else's observation. To realize you had been studied with the same attention he gave to saints and angels. "It's not romantic," he said, as though he could read her confusion. "Or maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not trying to seduce you. I'm trying to understand how a person looks when they're genuinely thinking. Most people don't think. They perform thinking. But you actually do it. I can see it happen in your face." He opened to a blank page. "Sit there," he said, pointing to the window. "Turn toward the light. Don't pose. Just exist for a while." She sat. He drew. For an hour neither of them spoke. She could hear his charcoal moving across paper, the specific rhythm of his observation. Sometimes fast, capturing a line, sometimes paused, studying. This wasn't romantic in the way stories usually mean romantic. There was no physical contact, no declarations, no dramatic confessions. But there was intimacy of a different kind, the intimacy of being witnessed, of allowing someone to see you thinking, breathing, existing, of trusting them with your unperformed self. When he finished, he didn't show her the drawing. "Not yet," he said. "I need to finish it when my hands are steadier." What are you finishing? Your awareness, the thing you do when you notice something you're not supposed to notice. I need to get that exactly right. The Mother Superior came to his workshop on October 23rd, unannounced. She arrived during Caterina's evening visit and found them sitting on the floor, not touching, discussing whether blue or green better represented holy grief. Sister Benedetta was 68 years old, a former noblewoman who had entered the convent after her husband's death. She had been Mother Superior for 12 years and had survived 2 previous plague outbreaks. She was not naive about human nature. Giacomo is recovering, she said to Caterina. His fever has been normal for 4 days. Your dispensation ends tomorrow. Caterina stood immediately. Yes, Mother Superior. However, Sister Benedetta turned to examine Giacomo's sketches on the wall. Our chapel remains unfinished, and Giacomo is not yet strong enough to climb scaffolding. Someone will need to assist him when he resumes work. Someone who understands his vision for the fresco. She turned back to face them. I'm extending your dispensation. You may continue visiting to discuss the chapel's completion. 2 hours per day, always during daylight. And Giacomo... She fixed him with a look that could have cut glass. You will remember that she is a bride of Christ, not available for earthly attachments, regardless of what plague times make convenient. After she left, Caterina and Giacomo sat in silence. Finally he said, She knows. Of course she knows. And she's letting it continue anyway? She's giving us time to finish whatever this is, to understand it, and then to end it properly. How much time? Until you're strong enough to complete the fresco. Maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8. And then? Then I go back to enclosure, and you finish the Madonna's face, and we return to being people who exist in the same building but different worlds. He picked up his charcoal, started sketching. She watched his hands move across the paper. Confident again? Steady. No more fever shakes. Then we'd better not waste it, he said. Here's what happens when 2 people know exactly how much time they have. They become ruthlessly honest. There's no point in performance when the end is scheduled, no reason to hide, to pose, to pretend to be better or different or more than you are. Scarcity clarifies truth. For the next 6 weeks, Caterina visited twice daily. Officially, they discussed the fresco. She would describe the scaffolding set up. He would sketch modifications. They would plan the logistics of his return to work. But embedded in every discussion about paint and perspective was a different conversation entirely. Why did you really take vows? He asked her on November 2nd. I told you, to escape marriage. That's why you entered. Why did you stay? She thought about it. Because the silence was honest. Because when you strip away conversation and performance and social expectation, you find out whether you actually exist or if you're just reactions to other people. And I discovered I existed. I had thoughts that belonged to me, observations no one required me to have. That felt like proof of something real. And now I'm realizing silence can be another kind of performance, that sometimes you need someone to talk to in order to discover what you actually think. On November 8th, he was strong enough to stand for short periods. They began meeting in the chapel instead of his workshop. He would study his unfinished fresco, explaining what he saw wrong with it, what needed to change. She realized he was teaching her to see the way he saw. The Madonna's dress, he said, pointing up at the ceiling. The blue is too perfect, too pure. Real fabric wrinkles, real dye fades unevenly. I painted holiness, but holiness isn't the absence of flaws, it's the acceptance of them. So you'll repaint it? I'll add shadows, creases, places where the fabric has worn thin from being touched. I'll make her look like someone who has actually lived in that body, not just posed in it. He turned to look at Caterina. You understand that better than anyone. You live in a habit that's supposed to make you disappear. But you can't. You exist anyway. That's what makes you holy. Not the costume, but the fact that you're still visible underneath it. On November 15th, she brought him the materials to make paint: fresh eggs for tempera, linseed oil, ground pigments in tiny ceramic jars. They spent the afternoon mixing colours, testing them on wood panels, discussing how different light changes perception. Vermilion looks wrong in shadow, he explained. It goes dead, but if you mix it with a tiny amount of blue, just enough that you can't consciously see the blue, it stays alive even in darkness. She mixed the paint exactly as he described, tested it against pure vermilion, saw the difference immediately. "That's what you do," she said. "You see the colours underneath the colours. Everyone sees them. Most people just don't admit it." She looked at him. "Is that what this is? Seeing what's underneath?" He didn't pretend not to understand. "Yes." "And what do you see?" "Someone who made the same calculation I made, trading one kind of life for another, and not entirely sure if it was worth it." "And what do you see when you look at yourself?" "Someone who chose beauty over security and would do it again, but who's also aware that dying alone painting a chapel ceiling is maybe not the triumphant ending the choice deserved." They were sitting close together, mixing paint, having a conversation that wasn't about paint at all. "You're not dying," she said. "We're all dying. I'm just doing it faster and more consciously than most people. The plague is over. You survived. And I'll die of something else, probably pneumonia, since the plague damaged my lungs. Maybe a year from now, maybe 5, but sooner than I would have otherwise." This was November 15th, 1348. According to his death records at the Archivio Diocesano, he died on March 3rd, 1350, 15 months later. Pneumonia, as he predicted. But that day, in November, they didn't know the specific timeline. They just knew it was limited. "I keep trying to figure out what this is," she said quietly. "This feeling, because it's not what I thought love was supposed to be." "What did you think it was supposed to be?" "Overwhelming, obliterating, taking over your whole life. But this feels different. Like clarity, like I'm more myself around you, not less." Maybe that's what love actually is, not finding someone who completes you, finding someone who sees you completely and doesn't require you to be anything other than what you are. "But we can't." "I know. And even if we could." "I know. So what is this?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to stop him, and took her hand. The first time they had intentionally touched. His skin was warm, rough from work, completely alive. "It's love that exists because it can't be consummated," he said. "Love that's pure because it has nowhere to go except into awareness. We get to experience loving each other without destroying either of our lives with it. How many people can say that?" She didn't pull her hand away. "Is that enough?" "Ask me in 6 weeks." By December 1st, he was strong enough to climb scaffolding again. They began the slow process of completing the fresco. She would stand at the base, mixing paint to his specifications, bringing him tools, discussing the work. Every day from Lauds to Vespers, the longest continuous time they'd spent together. Here's what medical evidence from the period tells us about plague survivors. According to skeletal analysis of mass graves studied by Sharon DeWitt at the University of South Carolina, approximately 30% of survivors experience chronic health complications: lung damage, persistent fever, fatigue, joint pain. Giacomo had all of it. He could work for maybe 2 hours before needing to rest. His hands cramped, his breathing became laboured, but he painted the most beautiful work of his life during those 6 weeks. Contemporary accounts describe the finished fresco as impossible and technically perfect but emotionally devastating. An anonymous monk's diary from 1349, preserved at the Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale, describes visiting the chapel and being moved to tears by the Madonna's expression, which somehow contains both infinite love and complete awareness of inevitable loss. Caterina watched him paint that expression. She knew whose face he was painting, what observation he was translating into that specific combination of love and awareness. On December 18th, he painted the final stroke, the Madonna's left eye, the tiny highlight that makes painted eyes look alive. When he came down from the scaffolding for the last time, she was waiting at the base. "It's finished," he said. "I know. Your dispensation ends tomorrow." "I know." They stood facing each other in the empty chapel. The fresco above them was still damp, the plaster still curing. In a few days it would be permanent, sealed into the architecture, unchangeable. "Did you finish the drawing?" she asked. "The one you started in October?" He reached into his satchel, pulled out a single piece of paper, handed it to her. It was her, but not performing nun, not performing prayer, just Caterina, looking at something beyond the frame with an expression that held curiosity and sadness and awareness all at once. The expression of someone who notices everything she's not supposed to notice and does it anyway. "That's what I see when I look at you," he said. "Someone who's fully alive inside circumstances designed to make you invisible. That's what I see when I look at you. I know, that's why I could paint it." She folded the paper carefully, put it inside her habit, against her heart, where no one would see it, where it would rest against her skin for the rest of her life. "What happens now?" she asked. "You go back to enclosure. I paint other chapels. We return to our chosen lives. And this? This was real. It happened. No one can take that away. But it's over." "Yes." She stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body, close enough to kiss him if she chose to violate every vow she'd made. She didn't kiss him. Instead, she placed her hand over his heart, felt it beating, alive, present, real. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me. Thank you for letting me." She returned to the convent that night, returned to silence and prayer and enclosure. According to convent records, she lived another 41 years, dying in 1389 at age 64. She never left the convent walls again, but the drawing stayed against her heart. According to her final testament, preserved at Camaldoli where she died, she requested it be buried with her. When her body was exhumed in 1847 for monastery renovations, archaeologists found traces of paper and charcoal inside her habit, too degraded to preserve, but present. Giacomo completed 11 more frescoes before his death in March 1350. According to art historian Margaret Plant's 1996 analysis of his work, every Madonna he painted after December 1348 has the same expression, the same combination of love and awareness, the same suggestion of someone who sees completely and accepts what she sees. Multiple faces, all expressing the same truth. Love is most honest when it knows its limits. The chapel at Santa Maria dei Fiori was destroyed in 1743 during renovations. No photographs exist of Giacomo's fresco. We know it only through written descriptions and through the copies other artists made of specific figures. The Madonna's face was copied at least 14 times by other painters over the next century, always that same expression, always described as impossibly human. So what does this story reveal about love? About the bargains we make with mortality? About the connections that form in impossible spaces? Maybe this, that love doesn't require consummation to be real, that sometimes the most honest relationships are the ones that exist precisely because they can't be acted upon. That limitation doesn't diminish intensity, it clarifies it. That being seen completely is more intimate than any physical touch. We want love stories to end with possession, with happily ever after and together forever, and the dissolution of boundaries between two people. But what if the most mature love is the love that exists while respecting boundaries? That says, I see you, I want you, and I also respect who you've chosen to be. Caterina and Giacomo loved each other for exactly 6 weeks. They touched twice, once when she checked his fever, once when she placed her hand over his heart. They never kissed, never made love, never built a life together. And yet, by all accounts, neither of them regretted it. Neither wished it had been different, because it was honest, it was mutual, it was recognition without consumption, and it existed in the only space where it could be perfectly true, in the gap between desire and action, between wanting and having, between love and possession. The plague created that space. Death made it possible. And two people who had both chosen impossible lives found each other inside the impossibility and said, "This, right here, this awareness of you while you're aware of me, this is enough, this is everything." Think about that the next time you're told that love without physical consummation isn't real love, that restraint diminishes feeling, that boundaries prevent intimacy. Sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes the frame is what makes the painting visible. Caterina carried his drawing against her heart for 41 years. Giacomo painted her face into a dozen Madonnas, and neither of them would call it a tragedy. They would call it the most honest 6 weeks of their lives. Thank you for staying with me through this, for investing 30 minutes in a story about love that existed because it couldn't be acted upon. If this resonated with you, if you've ever experienced connection that was profound, precisely because it stayed in the space of pure awareness, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you found something valuable here, share it with someone who thinks too much late at night. Because these stories matter, not the fairy tales, but the true ones. The ones that show us that we contain multitudes, that we can love without possessing, that we can be fully ourselves inside impossible circumstances. That awareness itself, pure, mutual, sustained awareness, might be the highest form of intimacy we're capable of. Sister Caterina and Giacomo Bellini proved that, not by running away together, not by violating their vows, but by seeing each other completely and letting that be enough. Sleep well, dream of being witnessed.